For the next discussion, we sought people who are seeking to update the way policies and plans are made so that Portland can be a place of possibility and prosperity for people of color, so that public sector is a place where we innovate, and so business, grassroots movements, and policy are all interrelated levers for positive systemic change. Each person here represents initiatives that are taking creative approaches to this, and I encourage you to listen carefully, not only to their shared values, but their divergent approaches. Remember, that is why we're here and being inspired by today is the divergent approaches. Let me first welcome our moderator for this discussion, Walter Robinson, who has dedicated his life and work to addressing local problems through public sector engagement, as demonstrated in his work with Commissioner Jules Bailey, the Joint Office of Homeless Services, and Black Male Achievement, and also the City Club of Portland. Please also welcome his panelists, Joy Elise Davis from Design and Culture Lab and the Portland African American Women Leadership Forum, Mary Lee from Multnomah County Ideas Lab, and Gina Wooley from J.M. Wooley & Associates and the Black Investment Corporation for Economic Progress, Inc. As you're listening, don't forget, it's a perfect time to bring out your summit guide, jot some notes, do some doodles. We checked with them, and they don't mind if they see you doodling. So, with that, thank you.
Well, hello everyone. How are we doing? Yeah? You guys want to do me a favor? I know you've been here for a long time. You had a little lunch. Just shake it out a little bit. Get ready for this conversation. And we're going to dive a little deep here. So to make sure everyone's comfortable, feeling good. Yeah? How we feeling? I'm sorry, one more time? All right, let's get this going. As mentioned, my name is Walter Robinson II. And I'm not from Portland, but I'm of Portland. So how many of you are from Portland? Raise your hand. Okay. Wow, okay. It's more than I thought, okay. How many of you are from Oregon? Okay. And just because I'm a Californian, how many people here are from California? Yes, look at all these Cali people right here. Turn around and look at this. You see this? Okay. All right. So enough silliness. Let's jump into this. So today we have some amazing people with us who have done work in the present, the past, and we're dreaming of a better future. So I want to start off with, they got a brief introduction, but these three amazing women sitting on stage have done a lot for the community. So I'm going to pass it on over to them to let them, within, 30 seconds to a minute, briefly describe who you are and the work you've done in Portland since you've been here. And then we'll get a chance to have this amazing conversation. So Gina, let's start with you. You got to use the microphone, though.
Oh, yes, okay. Thank you.
I got you.
Just keep track of me. My name is Gina Wooley, and I'm a developer and a development consultant that develops for community impact. So most of the projects that I've worked on in the last 20 years have been development projects that essentially have community benefit and involve public-private partnerships. I'm also a board member for BICEPT, which is basically trying to create a brand called the Soul District, which some of you may have heard about, which is both a virtual and a physical place.
I'm Mary Lee. I work for Multnomah County in an office called The Mill, which is the Multnomah Idea Lab. And we're a relatively new office in county government. We're charged with finding policy and innovation solutions within the human services, not IT, the human services sector, particularly related to the intersections of poverty and racism. And I am a proud bureaucrat. And for those of you who don't think those two words can go together, I'm a proud bureaucrat for the work that we are engaged with, that we'll hear a little bit more about later, but also from my heritage. My father used to say all the time, the Chinese people invented bureaucracy 2,000 years ago. You should be proud to be a bureaucrat. So I want you to know that I'm here and outing myself as a proud bureaucrat today. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joy Ellis. I'm wearing two hats today. I founded Design Culture Lab. We are a racial equity and collaborative design strategy firm, so we focus on public involvement, racial equity consulting. My background is in politics, collaborative design, and interdisciplinary urban design. And the other hat I'm wearing is from the nonprofit, the Portland African American Leadership Forum, PAL for short, and we do political participation work and leadership development work here in the city.
Okay. And that was brief. That was great. Thank you, ladies. We were having a conversation backstage, and I would like to bring that conversation to you all today. So I mentioned previously talking about the present, which explains where we're at now, and the past, and then what our future can be based on the dreams of a utopia we wish we can be in that is human-centered and is community-led and driven. It's not to say that this hasn't been done in the past in Portland, which gets me to my first question. Mary, as someone who is doing innovative work and who's able to have pilot projects in your office, and not only just dream about the future we would like to see, but also create that through some models, and then also working to expand those. What is some of the work that you're working on now that is community-centered and focused on humans and people?
Well, before I talk about some of the work of the mill, I want to establish something that is really critical to both my work personally, but also the work of our organization and team. And I think it's foundational, actually, for all of us who are in this innovation, social impact arena to know and understand. And that is, if government, past and current, policies, practices, and investments, and actually, let's not say if, let's say as, because there's plenty of evidence that this is true. We no longer need to question whether or not it's true. As governments, programs, policies, practices, and investments have created in either whole or large part the tremendous inequities in our community today, there are only two conclusions to take from that understanding. And the first is that government has an absolute obligation to invest in and evolve itself in righting the wrongs that we have been participating in from historic day to the present. And I think this is a more hopeful message. We actually, if we had the ability to cause these inequities, we also have the ability to find solutions that can help end these inequities. But if we don't have this understanding, we can't understand how this work has to move forward through our local government institutions, whether it's the city, the county, or regional government. In the mill, we are very concerned, as I said before, with this intersection of poverty and race. And we see it manifest every day and in every aspect of people's lives in this community, in Portland and or Multnomah County. And we think it absolutely has to do with wealth and assets. And that we have to be unapologetic about talking about that. Many times, the image of who we see who's in poverty is not the reality of who's in poverty or why that person is in poverty. And if our image of who's in poverty is someone who's broken, who needs to be fixed, who needs to be served, we miss all of the structural and institutional realities that have contributed for that individual or that family to find themselves in poverty. And we think it's critically important that we look not at the individual situation, but at the community level situation and the strategic, systemic, institutional level, because if we don't, we're not going to find solutions that actually work on that widespread level and affect the kind kind of community change that needs to happen, we will find ourselves looking at individual by individual by individual solutions, which is where we've been today, that has been critically important for individual people, but actually has not done what needs to happen in order to gain the really big change and the really big shifts we need in our communities.
So to piggyback off that, oh, you can go ahead and clap. Yeah, but do realize we only have like 30 more minutes to have this conversation. So just want to throw that out there too. But yeah, when I hear you talking about systemic and institutionalized racism that is deeply entrenched within governments, and I think about some of the work you've done, Gina, around building community-centered plans and working towards that with the work that you do. Can you tell us a little bit about plans that have been created in the past that have helped you do the work that you do, but also build a community with community's input and help folks understand the wealth that is centered around the infrastructures that you built? Because I'm one that believes that gentrification only happens when economic development builds a community up without having the community involved. So what does it mean to have the community involved in processes and then go on to build out from that plan?
Well, you know, just to provide a little bit of background, I've been involved in community development activities as an activist, as a volunteer in many cases, for 45 years in North and Northeast Portland. So I've seen the entire cycle that we have had in Northeast Portland. And we have had plans that were created by the people in the community. The problem is those plans were, the follow-through on those plans, the implementation. It's one thing to make a plan, that's the first step. The next step is you have to implement the plan, and there has to be accountability, and the government partners, the public partners, the nonprofit partners who are supposed to implement aspects of those development plans have to be held accountable. And we have to have a community-based organization or a coalition of community partners who essentially hold all of the folks who are supposed to deliver on that plan accountable for actually implementing the plan. So for example, the Albina Community Plan was adopted by the City Council in the 1990s. If you look at the Albina Community Plan, it was a very comprehensive plan that addressed education and social services and transportation and housing, all of the elements that are important to low-income and communities of colors needs and to grow for economic development. And the problem is that if you go back and look at that plan, probably Joy, when she talks later, will talk about, you know, there are the same areas that we're looking at this point. We have the same issues today. But what happened is that many of the goals in that plan were never followed through on. Government was not held accountable. And then the other thing I would say, because these are the things that we need to learn about from the past in order to do a better job in the present. The other thing is that most of the plans that were developed for Northeast Portland were essentially geographically focused. When you have geographically focused plans and government is primarily responsible for implementing it, you get into all kinds of issues about discrimination and who can and can't access resources. And so we need people-focused plans, not geographic-focused plans that are addressed to people's needs. And most of our economic development planning that's gone on related to the Black community and the low-income community in North and Northeast Portland were geographically based. And so that allowed others to come in and take advantage of that. Some of the projects that I've worked on grew directly out of community processes in Northeast Portland. Vanport Square is a commercial development project that was developed in the urban renewal zone. It actually is a commercial condominium. We sold those units to small businesses, minority, about 11 of those are women and minority businesses that now own property in Northeast Portland. Many of those businesses would be gone today if it weren't for the fact that they own their property. So the other, I guess, point that I want to make is when we're looking at how to build wealth and how to have social impact, we've got to really look at how do we anchor people down, because anytime you're working on improving communities, when you improve them, you end up putting them back in the marketplace. And when the marketplace takes hold, there are forces that not even government can intervene in. Government has to intervene before those forces take hold. It has to land bank, it has to save opportunities so that when those neighborhoods really turn because of all the activism, that essentially there is still opportunity for the people who created that revitalization.
All right, let's put a... Everybody remember land bank. I want to put a pin in that and come back to that a little later. But thank you, Gina, for talking about plans should be people-centered, because I think that's the perfect transition to the People's Plan, which was 2 years of work done by Joy and many other individuals that went into crafting an awesome, you want to show them? Plan here.
130 pages.
That is really good. It's like it can be read by high school students and all the way up to dean of high schools, and colleges. It's a really good document, and I am looking forward to it being used. But tell us a little bit about the process of what it took to create this plan and your ideas and goals for actually achieving the recommendations in the plan.
Yes, thank you. First, I want to say that I appreciate the historicalness. I think when we think of collaborative design or we think of community-centered, we often think of this as this new idea, when in reality, this has been going on for a very, very long time. People have always wanted to be involved in urban planning, urban design, development, and government policies and initiatives. This is not new. I think what is new is this call for accountability. So with the People's Plan, this was a plan for people, people first, knowing that DC Lab and POLF, which is a collaboration of both, is really focused on racial equity and frontline communities and vulnerable communities. So this was a plan for Black Portland in particular. We spent a lot of time looking at the Albina Plan and the Russell Plan and all the amazing plans that Portland just loves to do, but has a really hard time realizing of kind of what are the failed ideas that didn't actually make it to implementation. And what we found is that people have the right to shape their environment, which is not a crazy idea. It's very simple. And we believe that African Americans in particular have the right to shape their environment. So this plan was very simple in its creation, is that we wanted to go around and ask Black Portlanders what utopia looks like and build from there. Too often we get asked to come to the table in very reactive ways where decisions are already being made at the planning and the city level. And I'm focusing on planning because the folks that steward this were planners and urban designers like myself who are really focused on activism in this space. And we truly felt that if we wanted to create this utopia, we had to demand it, we have to be bold in our initiatives, and we had to make sure that we were very holistic in our efforts. So what we did is we talked to just shy of 500 African Americans from East Portland to Northeast to North, everything from dance parties to focus groups. So we wanted to be where people are and make it very simple for them to participate in this process. So we asked what utopia looked like, we asked what their current conditions look like, but most importantly, we asked them what are the solutions that they think are gonna help them get to the next level. Again, too often, folks don't ask the people who are most affected to tell them what they need and what are the steps that need to go there. So our job in this plan was really to be a mirror. So we took all this information in, and then we mirrored it back to community in a way, and we uplifted it, but we mirrored it back. So this document outlines a great vision statement for health, education, administration of justice, environmental justice, housing, economic development. So it had those vision statements, but it also listed out initiatives, policies, and programs that people wanted, and connected it to existing, so we weren't out here trying to reinvent the wheel, but we really wanted to make sure that this was a holistic plan about what it meant to be a thriving, connected Black community after, and even not after, during this kind of post-displacement era that we're in for African Americans. And it was a good process. I know I can ramble for a very long time around it. But yeah,
Please
pass.
don't, but continue. You
I'll
have
send it. I know, I was looking at you.
few more seconds.
But in terms of implementation, and I'm sorry, I'm from Jamaica, so I talk very fast when I get excited. But I think implementation is key to this work. Portland, like I said, we love planning. We will do it all day. We love community processes, and I think the key is that we need to make sure that that's not just for the majority population, that's for the people that are most impacted by these decisions, and we need to make sure this plan is actually utilized. So we wrote it in a way so that an everyday person can take it with them to neighborhood associations, which we know are very white spaces dominated by white males. We want them to come with knowledge to say, you know what, this is what I've heard that people wanted, and I can list out and I can point to you exactly what those initiatives need to look like. This is something you could take when you go testifying to say, this is what African Americans, this is what I've heard, and this is what I want to make sure it's being mirrored. So far we've been meeting with government. We're doing a session with City of Portland, actually in 2 weeks, for their Black History Month programming. We've been meeting with nonprofits. But we really want to make sure that this is not just something that sits on the shelf, that we can push for it, and we're going to be bold in our efforts in holding people accountable to what they're supposed to do, which is plan for the city, for the people, yeah.
I'm happy that I get to joke with you all because we know each other well. But outside of that, I think for all the urban planners out there, I know there's going to come a time where you have to speak for a community. And if you're going to speak for the African American community and you're not African American, please make sure you have the People's Plan with you so that it can help you work through some of the things you never think about and also experiences that you may try to understand but don't know. This is a very driven plan that was planned by the people. And we need folks out there who are looking to be urban planners in the future, use this as a tool. So when I think about this tool, and I think about Portland being a city of planners, but having a hard time implementing those plans, I think about one thing that I try to take with me in all of my roles that I had, is one, put the people first, and then two, start with equity whenever planning something. So if we start with equity and we build a plan, what does it look like to continue to build on that plan with equity at the forefront? Excuse me, let me be very specific. Thank you, Joy.
Sorry.
Racial equity. I know that's like either a bad word or a buzzword in Portland, but racial equity at the forefront. You're absolutely right. Name it. Name your equity and diversity you're looking for, because I've been in a room full of African American men in this town, and it's been the most diverse room I've ever been in. So think about that and understand that. But also, let's go back to the implementation piece, because I think that's very critical. There have been a few plans that have sat on shelves but have taken a lot of time and process and taxpayer dollars to create. What does it actually look like to implement plans such as the People's Plan and other plans that you all have worked on, having all the tools you need to be successful?
Well, I'll try to answer that. I think that one of the issues for implementation is that you've got to have people who are committed to implementing the goals. So what we've had is we've had government entities adopt plans, we've had neighborhood groups adopt plans, but then they just sort of go on the shelf. And so when we put these plans forth, particularly around racial equity, and they involve our communities, and we've had, you're getting the best and most current thinking about what's important to us, then those plans need to be used in how you plan activities and deliver services through your organizations, and how you govern, how cities, I mean, you know, the surrounding jurisdictions look at, because a lot of the African American population and the low income population is ending up in Gresham. It's ending up in other places because of the gentrification. So now there's an opportunity for those jurisdictions to think in front of what is absolutely going to happen if we don't start identifying, we don't have strategies ahead of time. If government and community partners are not working together to create preserve opportunities for low-income and minority people to be part of the community. Those things have to be done before you have economic turn, because once you have economic turn, it becomes more and more difficult to create those opportunities. In gentrified areas, some of the best opportunities you have to create social impact are with publicly owned sites. So think affordable housing sites that have been land banked through TIF, through urban renewal dollars and those kinds of things. Those are where we still have opportunities to do something, for example, in Northeast Portland, sites that have been preserved by Prosper Portland and the Housing Bureau. So that is something that we need to be thinking about in those places where many of our poor individuals and our communities of color have reconstituted themselves because of the gentrification that's gone on in the city. So implementation is following through and having accountability, I think, is the most critical issue related to implementation. And then having implementation takes a coalition of partners. So for example, Joy has done a plan, the PALF has done a plan, but PALF can't implement that entire plan. You need a coalition of partners to implement any kind of comprehensive economic development, community revitalization plan. And those partners need to hold each other accountable for actually delivering on the goals and objectives.
So Mary,
Okay, I was going to say
well,
something.
hold on, I got a question for you about this accountability piece, because you're public sector. And I've worked with you in a few things, and I've had a chance to witness you not only challenge your staff to be more accountable to these plans, but also for them to do a little bit more introspection around what equity means. And you've also held commissioners and other directors accountable to the words they say. So what does it actually look like to build those accountability mechanisms in the government we just mentioned earlier, in trying to undo and right some of these wrongs, while also building a future that's inclusive for us all?
Okay, well, you just invited me, so I'm going to go way woo in this moment. I actually think it looks like acts of love. When I love someone enough, even as a stranger, to say, you have to look at this, and you have to look at this from a racial justice standpoint, and here's what that looks like, and here's what it requires of you, that I think is transformational. And I am committed to transformational reality within government. So, for instance, very specifically, I would say that the vast majority of my colleagues don't even know that the People's Plan exists. How many here hadn't heard of the People's Plan before today, right now? Had not heard of it, did not know it existed, did not get the little bit of information about how that process worked. 500 African American colleagues, neighbors, partners in our community have told us what they need to have an equitable life amongst us, with us, next to us, right? Walking out of this room today, every single person now, the next chance you're in a conversation about economic development, gentrification, or you're testifying as Joy was talking about, ask them if they've read the People's Plan. Do they know the People's Plan? And what in the People's Plan relates to the topic that we're talking about, right? That is my job and my responsibility as a proud bureaucrat, is to be inside the belly of the beast and ask these things and fight for these things and stomp my feet and, throw the temper tantrum of these things, all as an act of love within a beloved community. And I think now, more than ever, we need these acts of love in the most upfront, energetic, in-your-face, confrontational, right? I'm not talking about romantic love. I'm talking about the love we have for a community that we are trying to build and create and live in, and our children live in, and our families live in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I would say all of the risks that must be taken and pursued in my life, my work, in your lives and your work, has to be done and seen through this lens of it is an act of love to stand for racial justice, and every time you do it, it actually helps to transform the world. So that's how I would define everything happening within the county around these places, and the more that I do it, the more that others do it, then there will be transformation. Sorry, you led me there. It's February.
Wow. I was not expecting to be hit with love, and I'm glad you explained that to me, because like my thoughts were going towards anger and being upset and just thinking about disparity. So thank you for that. I needed that today. But also I think there's one important thing that Mary said. It's like we all have the power, and it's like the power, it does lie in the people, and the people did create this. And when we talk about collaborating, like, you all have that same power. Now you just have a tool to use while you're using that power and exercising that as well. So when we talk about implementation, Joy, it seems like you're taking this show on the road. So what does it mean to add in that love piece? Because I know you're going to be in some really frustrating positions when people are confronted with these realities. So what does implementation actually look like when you're hit with those things, and how can we work with public, private, and nonprofit sectors to actually achieve this change we're looking to see?
Great question. I appreciate so much the love piece, because too often we think it's only the role of government to implement this work or hold people accountable. In this document, we outline that we don't want just allies. Like, allies are great, but we need accomplices. We need folks who are ready to be radical and to say, you know what, I may not be an African American, but I can see what we as a community, as a city, has done to this group of people. And you can say that same thing for Asian groups and Latino groups. Like, we have a responsibility, and I think right now we're at a crossroads, both city, state, and federally, in terms of what we want to do and what's our legacy? Do we want to continue doing the work that we know does not work for everyone, or do we want to be bold in our efforts through love, through research, through policy, and make the change? So as I'm on the road, like you said, shopping this around, we've been meeting with nonprofits who kind of had that same love piece. Not only communities of color led nonprofits, but also white-led nonprofits who are really interested in this work, and they want to be accomplices and trying to figure out how they can get involved. With government as well, we have all these great people on the inside, the belly of the beast, like you mentioned before, trying to help us strategize and say, you know what, the way you've written this is perfect, but you need to talk to X, Y, and Z. You need to talk to this person. Like, we need people who are ready to take this and roll with it. I can read it back to you if you need me to read it to you. I can tell you how we got to this place, but at a certain point, we need community ownership. We need us to come together and to rally behind a very easy idea of how do we make this place equitable for all of us and not just for some.
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to add one piece. I think that, because I know we're here because of the School of Business, I really think we need more partnerships between government, nonprofits, and the business community. The business community is never really on deck with the rest of us, and I think that's there are individual partners that are on deck, but I think that what we need to create, and we need to be innovative and creative about creating new relationships. Are there businesses that are interested in workforce development? Are there businesses that are interested in helping to do real estate development, or participating or being a tenant in a project that's developed by BICEPT in conjunction with private development partners, where we're housing services for nonprofits? We actually need to have the business community more actively engaged in doing this work. And so I'm putting the charge out to those of you who are in that community, for those of you who are in business school, to start thinking about what kind of connections, how can you play a role in relationship to all of this need that exists in our communities. And, to think about that creatively, and that's what social entrepreneurship is all about, is making that connection from doing something as a private sector entity with helping a social enterprise that needs to be addressed in the community. So I just want to put that charge, because I think that's part of what we need to do that has not been done and that we can do a much better job of doing.
Can I add one resource to look up? If you're a community developer, Mercy Corp Northwest, I don't know if there's anyone in the room from there, they have an amazing community investment trust program that is just getting started but has so much potential for so much impact of having community members actually pay monthly to be investors into this property. I mean, as our city changes, we're going to be developing quite a lot over the next few years. How do we make sure that we're getting wealth back to the people who are most likely going to be kicked out of this space? I mean, we have to do something about that too, but as we're moving forward, there's so many other ways to connect and so many innovative ways that are already proven that we can, adopt and move forward with. But I agree with you.
I'm happy to hear that Mercy Corps is in the house. Love that organization. But also I want to talk about business. So we talked about business a little bit and how business can play into, this collaborative governance. But when I think about business, I had a chance to work in the creation of B Corps when I worked for Metropolitan Group. And I always seem to think about why it seems like it's so innovative, but it's why isn't everyone doing this? If you're, you have the opportunity to still make money in a capitalist society, but also think about the human impact and the environmental impact. When we look at that, and we look at how we partnership towards creating and implementing things, I want to go back to one thing that I asked you all to put a pin in. Do we remember what that was? Land banks, yes. And I think Joy brought it back up with me just now with the Mercy Corps idea. So I believe those are innovative strategies towards achieving this utopia we would like to see. So what does it look like to actually have a community land bank within Portland?
Proud Ground does have a community land bank, and essentially I'm working with Proud Ground as a consultant on an affordable housing affordable ownership housing project on North Interstate. And this project would house preference families that want to return to Northeast Portland, but the units would be for sale. So it's a very innovative idea. It won't be an easy project to do. It'll have a lot of financial holes that we need to fill, but it's a model that ought to be proved up, because this is an opportunity for those units to remain affordable forever. So what's happened in the past when we've had affordable housing ownership entities, nonprofit, we had an ownership entity for 20 years in Northeast Portland. One family, you get property, you rehab it, you get federal dollars to rehab it, then you sell it to a low-income family. That one family is the only affordability you will ever see from that property, because essentially when they sell it in 10 years, 15 years, it goes back into the marketplace. With a land bank, you have an entity, you have a community-based entity that holds that in trust. And so that portion of the property price remains affordable. And you can turn that property, and families that are very low income can end up buying a property and then selling it, and they get some upside for selling that based on the marketplace. But the land is never part of the equation, and so it keeps the property still affordable for the next family. And what we haven't done, one of the things BICEP's looking at, is doing that on a commercial level with commercial properties. Because we haven't seen a lot of that in this community, although they're doing it in Colorado. They've done it in Atlanta. There are other places where land banks have been used very successfully for community revitalization, for commercial property developments that were intended to serve the community and to have a lasting effect.
So I want to point those out and sort of come back to your question about business and how do we create this. So I think these are examples, Gina, that you just gave of a new narrative of what it means to participate and be a part of the American dream. And I actually think that the old narrative or the current narrative of, you know, you work really, really hard and you scrape and you save and you buy your first house and that begins then to have generational wealth that you hand down to your children, that narrative no longer exists. And yet we are all organized, business, government, social services, nonprofits, in problem solving for how to get people to reach that narrative. And I think rather than be engaged in that, the challenge for all of us is to be engaged with finding out what the new narrative is, developing what the new American dream is, and then working to solve that. Because the longer we spend finding solutions to this old dream that is no longer possible, has never been possible for many of our communities, frankly, but is not possible now, and continuing to work and problem solve and innovate and think about how to get there is the definition of insanity, right? Rather, we should all, and I think this is part of why we're here today, be engaged in trying to figure out what is the new narrative that's struggling to emerge right now, and then figuring out what our problem solving and our plan and our best strategies are to achieve that new narrative and that new dream. And if we can get a handle on that, then I think we got nothing but progress to move forward on. So.
That was all said with love, right? That was all said with love?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I felt all that too.
Absolutely.
Joy, do you have anything to add?
No, I know we're probably close on time. No, I agree and uplift and support everything that was said before. Yeah, we just need to be bold in our efforts, no matter what industry you're in. There's a role you can take.
Okay.
You need to take.
Yes.
Well, I was going to do a quick plug for PALF.
Please do.
Yeah,
Should I say the website and
please
everything?
do.
If you go to palf.org, PAALF.org, you will be able to download the full plan. If you want to just look at the economic development, you can do all that. And if you email me, I'm happy to walk you through it or talk on the phone. Yeah. Right on.
You got that kind of time?
I mean, I got time for the revolution.
Okay.
With love.
Hey,
with
with
love.
love.
With love.
With love.
Because as we know, it will not be televised. It will be tweeted. Well, we got a little bit more time. Do we got any questions from the audience? Raise that hand up high, wave it around. Some of them.
I have a question. You were saying, we were talking about how this issue is for people of color, because the American dream, right, has never been a reality.
Yeah.
Do you think that now that it's affecting the majority, how does that impact now the minority, people of color, even more, right? Because the solution starts to be about helping the majority, and the minority still stays probably in a worse, bigger impact, right? Or worse impact.
So hold on, Mary. I think that's going to be our only question because that was very complex, and I'm pretty sure all three people on the stage are going to want to hit that. So go ahead, or tackle that. Excuse me. Yes, please excuse me. Go ahead.
You know, I think it starts with we got to get in our own heads. We're not the minority. We're the majority in this country and in this world, right? So I think it starts with we got to get in our own heads and understand that. Now, I think we've seen very recently what happens when the dominant white culture understands that they might have some challenge or risk in the world, and what has come back is violence and murder and death to people of color, right? So we understand what happens when you start to push and touch on that privilege. I think the new narrative of what the new American dream is going to be is going to come from us. is going to have to come from us, but it's going to come from us as we continue to understand just how much we have taken in and internalized who we are, what we're capable of, and what's possible, and then build from there with, you didn't say allies, you said accomplices, to find our accomplices wherever we can find them and move in that direction. But we've got to understand that power is not given, right? Power is taken, and I think it's gonna, we've seen the beginning stages of this, and I hate to say the beginning stages of it, but we know that, right? We know that reality, and we know how to stand, and we know how to survive, and we know how to overcome that reality when faced with it. So I think it's going to take more of us, and I think it's going to start with us getting in our own thinking and our own hands, and then being with each other, right? And over the differences that divide us as people of color, even within communities, ethnic and other divides.
I would agree, echo, support, all of that. I think it's very dangerous for us to think that trickle-down solutions work. We know it does not work. We're very smart people. We have enough research to know this. A great example of what you actually lead and solve for problems of the most vulnerable first, the civil rights movement. I don't know how many people know this, but white women in particular benefited so much from that movement. And if we would have started just with them, we would have had great solutions for them, but the rest wouldn't have been taken care of. Instead, what we did is we flipped that little trickle-down kind of myth that for some reason we keep perpetuating and solve for the most vulnerable first, and everyone else benefits. We know that civil rights affirmative action benefits white women all the time, but if we would have only solved there, we would have missed out so many people. So another great example is, I'm an architect by trade, so the sidewalks, the little dip that goes down. We solved that for folks with disabilities, but so many other people benefit from that small innovation. People with kids, parents with strollers, people who are trying to move around the city. This something small that we are actually going for the most vulnerable really does have an effect for those up. So as we're solving affordable housing issues or things that are finally hitting this middle class or middle income group, we can get distracted and do that first, but we won't actually get to the solution we really want.
So what Joy is there's actually a term for what Joy just described, and it's called targeted universalism. And Dr. John Powell talks about this. So I would encourage you all to go read him as well, because it was very strategic in how the county funded our Sun service system. And we're able to flip that way we fund services based on some work that he's helped us do around thinking through targeted universalism. So that's kind of like the trickle down. Start with the most vulnerable, and it trickles down to the entire community. So with that, we would like to say our goodbyes, and thank you all for having us. Lovely ladies.